Speaking of great podcasts, great British podcasts. Speaking of great podcasts, great British podcasts. And that's Brown Girls Do It Too.
Итак, мы продолжаем ездить сегодня без лишней болтовни.
In love. That's just crazy to me.
Yeah, that's kind of deep.
You never ever just loved somebody who didn't love you back. Or when you were a teenager, did you not have crushes on people that you were like, I love you, I think about you every night? I think that's infatuation.
That's infatuation. That's not love. Yeah.
I think I definitely think this comes from Asian culture. Love is like, I will sacrifice my life for you. You are everything to me.
Yeah.
We literally have the phrase in Iranian, which is Gorbanet Beram, which you say to people when you're leaving, and it means I will die for you. So you're like,
this is very much an Asian culture.
It's like, hey guys, see you later, Gorbanet Beram.
Hey guys, bye guys, I'll die for you. I do the same. It's in our culture. Like, what's that word? Sacrificial.
I feel like I'm just in this conversation straight away, even though I've never met the girls, and completely different to The Harrowing, but such an incredible, successful podcast. Now, we are going to talk to one of the girls, Poppy J, from the podcast. But before we do that, Laura, tell me about this podcast, Brown Girls Do It Too.
Yeah, so this is a 6-episode sex and dating podcast hosted by 3 millennial British women of second generation Bangladeshi, Indian and Iranian heritage. And patriarchy, all these things in this just mold of like amazing personalities, like you can hear, they're just full of energy, full of bright vibrancy, and it's so shocking at points because you're not used to hering anyone really, particularly those that you don't know, tell you in depth about their sex lives and all the kind of embarrassing things that have happened in their past. But it is those moments that make it so warm, and you just like listen to it and you feel like a sigh of relief that like you're not the only one. But I think mostly this podcast, I think Poppy, who you've got on later, she did an interview, I think, with The Times, and she was saying that in her culture, sex is never talked about at all, and it's very much mixed with shame and things like that. And she even apparently had like rows with her family and stuff before, whilst doing this podcast, because they couldn't believe that she was doing it. But the quote that I've got from her is that she says shame is just used as a way to control women, especially in her community. And she says if you talk about sex, you normalize it, and you feel that liberation when you listen to this podcast. Like, it's just, it's brilliant.
And I think it's really important, as much as we need more diversity on television and on radio. The great thing about podcasts is I feel there's more voices there. And we say, I haven't really seen a space for Asian women to talk so openly about that. And it's just really important for me, even as non-Asian, to understand that culture and understand those topics for a space that, as I said, there hasn't been open conversation. So right now I'm going to bring in Poppy J from the podcast. So no better woman to talk about the podcast than the woman who does the podcast. Poppy J, hi, how are you?
Hi, I was just grinning from ear to ear listening to Laura. Do you want to sell our podcast to everyone? Take you on as our manager. And it was really funny listening to
I'll do it.
Oh, please, come on board. I was just listening to the clip as well. Like, I sometimes forget it's me, and I'm sort of sitting there listening to 3 other girls having a little giggle and a chin wag, and I was just like laughing, and it just, anyway, transported me back to that day. But yeah, it's great to be on. Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, first of all, why did you do this podcast? How did it come about?
Well, BBC Asian Network, who we have a lot to be thankful for. Let me go back. I have a theory. So Rubina, my ride or die partner, has a podcast called Das, and on that podcast, she was talking about sex, dating, and relationships as frankly and openly as she does often. And the producer Rayhan on the BBC Asian Network heard this, and I think pitched a podcast idea to the BBC Asian Network, and they, to their credit, brought the 3 of us together, because prior to this podcast, we didn't know, we'd never met. We met in the BBC canteen for the first time. The second time we met in a pub, and the third time we met in the studio.
No way.
Episode 1. And it's that classic thing that women do. You know, you sort of size each other up.
You are now my friend.
You're like, is she gonna like me? Are we gonna get along? I mean, we're talking about really intimate things here, and we genuinely did get on like a house on fire. And there are definitely moments in that podcast. I mean, Laura's clearly binged it. There are moments in there where we're like, oh, I don't want to say this. Oh, and then we're not really goading each other, but we're encouraging each other to talk and just say, come on, Rubina, say it, just say it, get it out. And if I was going to be completely honest, I thought I'll have to self-censor because that's what women do. I mean, not just brown women. All of us have to kind of watch what we say in certain spaces. But I think in the end, we threw caution to the wind. I was about to swear there.
Unfortunately, we have to censor curse words on BBC.
I promise I won't. There was a lot of quite potty mouth, but we said no. Let's just go for it. So that's what we did. And I think you touched on it earlier. There is. Experiences of young brown women talking about not just sex, not just dating. And Laura, I mean, absolutely nailed it. I think really, when I listened back to the podcast recently, I felt like it was so much more than that. We talk about identity, we talk about everything from self-care to pubic hair. Sorry, well, I say that.
That's okay. That's a body part. It's allowed. That's just biology.
There's nothing. No stone is written on.
You say, Poppy, that misogyny and shame was a big part of you growing up. You guys, you had to put a lot on the line doing this podcast. Where does that come from?
I mean, the stakes were definitely high for us, and a few of my siblings, and one of 6, stopped talking to me. And in their defense, I didn't actually tell them I was doing this podcast. I meant to, but you can imagine
you're a bit worried.
Exactly. Well, you can imagine the WhatsApp group. I wanted to talk to them individually because that's the level of communication that's required in our family, in our community. But doing a sort of 1-to-1 6-way call was just so long, and I was so busy, and it was my fault. And they found out through this rather controversial viral clip on an Instagram page, and they were absolutely mortified. They're very supportive now, and they totally understand why I did what I did. But I think that the stakes were higher, and I think for all 3 of us girls, we were like, we really want to create healthy conversations without feeling ashamed, without the restrictions of the cultural expectations that can be placed on Asian women in our community. And the misogyny, it runs deep. The patriarchy runs deep. And we were tired of being looked at as the victims. And we had, for every troll we got, and we got plenty of trolls, we had so many messages of support from women, which is really, really moving.
Do you even see with your family and maybe people who initially were against the podcast, have you seen a change in opinion with the success?
I think you need, the one thing you need to understand about the Asian community, and I suppose I speak for my community, is that change comes so slowly. It's like volcanic rocks. So my sisters just, it took them 8 months to kind of get over it and talk about it and be happy with my success. So I think progress is happening, but probably not as fast as I'd like it to. But I really do think, it's funny, we don't necessarily talk about it, but they are very happy, and they've shared the article, and I think for me that is positive. That's inspiring. They're making their changes in their own little way.
You speak about your success. You've definitely had a lot of success. You cleaned up at the British Podcast Awards, and I virtually presented one of the awards. And a plane flew over.
And you were like, bronze award goes to, silver award goes to, and then gold award. These 3 women, and I was like,
you're 3 women.
Is she? Exactly. I was like, we're 3 women. And then you say sex, and I was like, well, we definitely talk about sex. And then you said brown girls do it too, and I basically screamed. And I think there were quite a few technical issues, so I'm glad my screams couldn't penetrate through the Zoom barrier. But no, it was very, very exciting. And then I was having jerk chicken and dinner, and my boss at Asian Network was like, keep it on, watch it all the way till the end. And I just thought they were going to do a little montage of all the nominations and, get the nominees up on the screen and we wave and say thank you and toot our little whistles. And the two girls who presented the award to us the first time round, they knocked on the door at 10 o'clock. Bearing in mind, George the Poet is giving delivering an epic monologue about the podcast. I have absolutely no idea. And the girls knock on the door, I open the door, and I'm like, well, and they spent a good 10 minutes by my flat. We're taking photos, having a little natter, put them on the gram. And I just thought they'd lost an earring or something. And then they were like, you've won the best podcast. The girls have won the best podcast of the year. And I was just like, what? And I still had a chicken carcass rolling around in my mouth. I had no idea what they were talking about. And then I started screaming, and they're like, you're not live. And I thought, can I put some lipstick on? And they're like, go and put some lipstick on. And they were like, you're live. And I had to come back, and then more screaming ensued. So there you are.
How important is that recognition for you, for the three of you, but also for your community?
When we did this podcast back in 2019 in summer, we genuinely thought that 6 people would listen to the podcast. We'd put it on our CV. We'd say we'd, dipped into the podcast life, and that would be the end of that. And we thought we'd be a footnote in a free London newspaper. Honestly, we thought we'd be nothing. And the fact that we were nominated for Best Sex and Relationship category, and then we won, and I thought, well, that was the end of that. And then to have the girls knocking on the door, giving us the award, I don't know, I'm feeling a little bit emotional right now. It just really, I think because the stakes were higher for us, I really do feel that the stakes were a bit higher. And we were talking so openly without any filter. I really am proud that I hope have created a space for women to talk without any judgment, because I think judgment is still quite rife in our South Asian community, especially for women. So really, this award is a testament to them.
Very well deserved. Poppy J, thank you. And you can listen to BBC Asian Network's Brown Girls Do It Too podcast on BBC Sounds now. Lots more to come. We'll still be talking podcasts with Claire and Laura, but right now it's time for BBC 5 Live News with Sarah Green.
On digital, BBC Sounds, smart speaker and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
The Queen has sent a message of condolence to the President of Lebanon following the huge explosion in the port area of the capital, Beirut. The Queen says she and the Duke of Edinburgh are deeply saddened by the disaster, which has killed at least 100 people and left hundreds of thousands of others homeless. New restrictions have been introduced in Aberdeen after what's being described as a significant outbreak of coronavirus. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says the closing of pubs and restaurants and a tightening of travel limits would hopefully allow schools to reopen next week. The mother of the television presenter Caroline Flack has told the inquest into her daughter's death that she was let down by the authorities and hounded by the press in the final weeks of her life. The Love Island host had been due to stand trial for assaulting her boyfriend earlier this year when she was found dead at her home in London. And the Duchess of Sussex has won a High Court battle to keep the names of 5 friends anonymous as part of her legal action against the publisher of the Mail on Sunday. She's suing Associated Newspapers over an article which reproduced part of a handwritten letter she sent to her father, Thomas Markle, 2 years ago. Let's get the sport now. Here's Delith.
An early tea has been taken at Old Trafford in the first test between England and Pakistan due to the weather. Ellen Oldroyd, what can you tell us?
Yes, the covers are on here, Delith. It looks very dark and gloomy overhead, and we could be set for quite a prolonged period of rain, which is frustrating for Pakistan, maybe a little bit of a relief for England, because Babar Azam and Shan Masood were really getting stuck in the middle. 78 runs they put on together so far for the third wicket. Babar Azam a really fine 52 not out so far. Shan Masood, who's been in for twice as many balls as Babar Azam, is on 45. But the wickets that Jofra Archer and Chris Wokes took before lunch feel like a very long time ago now. England being held up, Pakistan maybe being frustrated at the moment because they were going well when the rain came down, but they're 121 for 2.
Thank you, Ellie. Not the news we wanted to hear. Meanwhile, the former Western Australia and Tasmania bowler Tim McDonald has joined the England women's coaching setup as senior assistant coach. Manchester United boss Ole Gunnar Solskjaer says winning the Europa League this season would be a big step forward for them and could spark a successful era. They take a 5-0 lead against Austrian side LASK into tonight's home leg of their last 16 tie. Rangers, though, face a much tougher task to reach the last 8. They trail Bayer Leverkusen 3-1 ahead of tomorrow's away leg, but they won't be able to call on striker Kemar Roof, who joined from Anderlecht yesterday. Here's Roof's former Leeds United teammate Liam Cooper.
He works hard for the team, and when he gets chances, he's a serious finisher. Going into the Rangers team, there's a lot of pressure, but he's dealt with expectation so far in his career, and hopefully he can get off to a good start and score the goals he can, because he's definitely worthy of that.
The impact of COVID-19 continues to be felt across sport. Arsenal say they plan to make 55 staff redundant, while the RFU is set to cut more than 100 jobs related to the community game. Meanwhile, as we told you last week, it's now been confirmed that this year's Six Nations Championship will conclude on the 31st of October. Organisers have also confirmed that Ireland's outstanding fourth round match against Italy will take place on the 24th in Dublin. The women's competition will conclude on the same weekends, with Scotland's outstanding third round match against Italy taking place on the 5th of December. The four-time champion John Higgins isn't having it all his own way in the second round of the World Snooker Championship. Jamie Broughton is watching at the Crucible.
No, this is a tough match for John Higgins against the Norwegian qualifier Kurt Maflin. Maflin really impressed as he beat Dave Gilbert in the last round. He's playing well again as well this afternoon. They're currently tied at 2 frames all. Earlier today, Barry Hawkins beat the Swiss debutant Alexander Ersenbacher by 10 frames to 2. Hawkins now faces the former world champion Neil Robertson in the second round.
Just cut out a few easy mistakes that I made there, and there's a few frames where Alexander should have nicked off me, where, no disrespect to him, I think someone of Neil's calibre would have cleared up and won them frames, and they're the frames that hurt. So he made it easy for me in the end, and I need to up my game.
Tonight, the first round action concludes with qualifier Martin Gould resuming 7-2 up against Stephen Maguire.
You can watch the coverage on BBC Two and online. That's the latest from BBC Sport.
The British Grand Prix.
The front lefters blown and punctured. Max Verstappen could win the race, and we're going to have the slowest race to the line in the history of Formula One. Hamilton locks up into Vale, and probably at the slowest speed ever won a British Grand Prix. Hamilton across the line, takes the checkered flag, wins in Silverstone with 3 wheels.
Get reaction and analysis from the British Grand Prix with 5 Live's Checkered Flag podcast. Download and subscribe now.
On 5 Live. Across the UK.
This is BBC 5 Live.
With Laura Whitmore.
Laura Whitmore here. It is 35 minutes past 3. I know normally on this show you have must watch, but I'm doing must listen some of our favourite podcasts as podcast popularity increases. I'm joined by Laura Gallup and Claire Freeman. But just running into studio now, I'm not going to let him go because he's trying to escape. But I want to say hello. Tony's coming up with Drive. Tony, how are you?
Sorry,
I'm just happy to see a real person. So yes. I was like, don't run off on me now.
I was only talking the other day, before lockdown, I once very angrily interviewed a gentleman on my show because I thought he wasn't in the studio and I hadn't seen him come in. And at the end of the interview, when I thanked him, he just popped up and walked out.
Where did you think the voices were coming from?
I thought he was just someone down the line. And he was hidden behind his screen. But yes, I'm here, so hello.
Hi.
Right, Drive, very quickly. The aftermath of that terrible explosion in Beirut. The question is now about this ammonium nitrate that was stored in the harbour. Who knew it was there? Some officials at the port have been arrested, so we'll look into that. Britain's first ever astronaut, Helen Sharman's on the show. We're going to talk about that SpaceX mission that's currently returned to Earth. Local lockdown in Aberdeen. Latest football transfer dealings. Pubs versus schools. This idea that Chris Whitty said there've got to be a trade-off. Whether schools go back, pubs might have to shut. Both sides will give their arguments. And I don't know if you've seen this, Laura, the groom-to-be in Sheffield who lit hundreds of tea lights before he offered to get engaged to his partner.
That's putting a lot of pressure on other men.
Well, no, especially as when he went to get her and came back, he burnt his flat down.
Oh, actually, do you know what? Maybe hold off on the candles.
So,
fire hazard.
We're going to talk about when grand gestures go wrong.
Looking forward to that, Tony. Nice to see your face.
Yes,
thank
you.
Mine. Still on the line, we have Laura Gallup, who is the co-host of Revisiting, the Nostalgia podcast, and Claire Freeman, a podcast coach. I love that job title, podcast coach. In my head, you're just like talking to podcasts going, yeah, you can do it.
It just had to kind of come up with, it's nice when you get to invent your own job title, isn't it, really? But, you know what, hearing Poppy there, that was so powerful, isn't it? Like what she's saying about podcasts, like have the power to change like conversations, to change
Poppy
lives.
From Brown Girls do it too. Just conversations that I know I haven't heard on a platform like that before.
It's interesting. So one of the podcasts that I do actually is Slimming World podcast, and it started because I lost loads of weight, but I found there wasn't anybody in the world podcasting talking about what it's like to lose weight. Lots of experts telling me, but then when you start to kind of go quite vulnerable and authentic and tell people what it is you've struggled with, it's amazing what you get back, and that's what's really unique in this kind of real intimate format, that it just really blows your mind how when you get a message from someone to say, I'm sending you this because you feel like my friend, and the listeners tell you things as a podcaster that they're not telling their family, their husbands or their friends. That's how special podcasting can be.
I think as well, as I said, a space where people can be a little bit more vulnerable, and vulnerability is very important when it comes to podcasting. I find people say things to me in a podcast more openly than they would probably on a radio show like this. And one thing that I want to, actually a podcast I want to talk, I know you girls have talked about your favourite podcasts. I've got so many, but this is a recommendation. It's just one that I think is very important, and it's this.
I'm Brene Brown. Welcome to the Unlocking Us podcast. 12 years ago, I bought a used microphone, I hooked it up to my laptop, and recorded a podcast on empathy and shame. It was very DIY from my kitchen table, but I fell in love with podcasting. It was intimate, raw, and most importantly, it gave me a way to connect directly with you. Well, here it is a dozen years later, and I'm coming back with Unlocking Us.
It is an incredible series, and there's so much there, and there's lots of different guests who Brene has on. There's a great one with Alicia Keys, and all names from well-known names to not so well-known names. And a lot of people might know Brene, who is a researcher, for her TED Talk. She has this TED Talk called The Power of Vulnerability, and it's one of the top 5 most viewed TED Talks in the world. Have you seen it?
Oh my goodness!
Watch it
if anybody hasn't Googled it yet.
It's 45 million views. It's getting there.
But she did a follow-up, didn't she, where she talked about she wasn't ready for how big that was going to go.
And it's something that I think, the power of vulnerability, I think that's why a lot of people kind of attach themselves to this podcast, because the conversations, the stories, the experiences, and even though it may be experiences that we can never understand, we still feel connected to.
See, I think that there is a real craving amongst us all for, let's just get rid of this perfection. You know, a lot of us are sick about all our Instagram photos need to be absolutely on point. You know, we have to always present our best selves. Actually, we're tired of that. We just want to be real. And when you hear this woman say that, yes, you are okay as you are, it's okay if you stumble, just get started. That's hugely powerful, whether you want to start a podcast or you just want to tell people your story or voice to people what you're struggling with. It's amazing.
Laura, have you listened to it?
Yeah, so I listened to one episode today, which was one on anxiety and like our default anxious state. It was so interesting because it was just, you find yourself relating and realizing that you do stuff that you didn't even know. And I always find with anything to do with mental health, once it's got a name and you know what it is, it's so much you can deal with it. Do you know what I mean? It's when you're experiencing things that you don't know what it is, that's when the panic sets in. But if you know, oh, this is your anxious state, I know that sounds really naff talking about it like in this forum, but like I'm going to listen to more, definitely. And I listened to one also where the episode that I listened to was just her talking for like 40 minutes, and I listened to the whole thing. And normally I'd be like, oh, shush, please, I don't want to hear you for 40 minutes. But she was great, and she told loads of stories, and it was really good.
She's a researcher. She spends most of her life, and she comes from a science background, but she spent most of her life just studying people, and she has so much experience. I think studying people is between vulnerability, anxiety, shame, empathy, and as I said, just has all this knowledge from just watching people and having that space. I just think if you haven't listened to it, and I recommend, I'd say for all ages as well. I know with some of these podcasts it might be directed towards male, female, younger, older, but this is kind of one for everybody.
Definitely.
Agreed.
Definitely.
Right, so that's my recommendation. Laura, over to you. What is your next recommendation?
Okay, so this is quite a big one.
Oh, yes.
So a big one in the podcasting space. So it's a Spotify exclusive, and it's the Michelle Obama podcast. So she is bossing it in the podcast space, launching her own podcast, and had her first guest as Barack Obama. And they talk about, so it's a podcast about relationships and all the different relationships we have in our lives. So with our partners, with our friends, with our mentors, with our families, This one with Barack is about our relationship to our community and how we've all got a little bit individualistic these days, and we need to actually stop thinking about ourselves and that next paycheck and la 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 la. We need to be thinking more about each other, and actually the only growth that you're going to get is if you're trying to grow each other collectively. And I know it's not a new thing, but it hit me because I think we're so on our own little hamster wheel, and we're so like, yeah, I've got to get that next job and I've got to do this, got to do that. You don't think about the fact that because they broke up with their boyfriend or all this kind of stuff that maybe you might be like, oh, I'm too busy. It actually might give you greater fulfillment to go and do it. Anyway, I've just rambled on about me.
But there is I feel like everything that Michelle Obama, even though, I mean, she's so far from my world, she was actually voted in a recent survey as the most admired woman in the world. And I get that. And there's something very trusted about her. And despite, being former first lady, there's something very relatable. And so what you're talking about there, I suppose the point of the podcast is talking about relationships that make who we are. And that's, family, friends and colleagues. So let's just have a little listen to this podcast.
I think part of what also happened, because I moved around a lot as a kid and I didn't have a big extended family, was my friendships became really important. All my buddies who you still know, Bobby and Greg and Mike and all the guys I grew up with and have stayed in touch with all these years. That was my crew. That was my family. It's interesting when I look back, all of us were from broken homes. All of us were working class to middle class, at least from an income perspective, but we were going to a school that had a lot of rich kids. We had to share and improvise.
I mean, to have anyone on your first podcast, get the husband involved, Barack Obama. And I mean, we will have heard Barack being interviewed by loads of people in the past, but to have Michelle so close to him sit there, and you do feel, Laura, like, you're in that room.
Oh, definitely. And it's so cute when they're like, I mean, it could be, some could describe it as sickening, but they are just on that perfect balance of it being cute and like, oh, because when they're talking about, he's like, oh, did you fall in love with me for my good looks? She's like, oh, you are cute. And normally I'd be like, bleh. But it was actually, I was like, wow, these two amazing
It's like listening to your parents flirt or something.
Yeah, that's funny. There's some lovely moments. Like at the beginning, she's doing a whole, she's trying to do a retake of a line. He's giggling at her. But what I am looking forward to, because this one, obviously, they're not going to say anything particularly risque, Barack Obama is not going to come out there with an absolute curveball. But what I am looking forward to is the episodes. I think she's got her mum on, she's got her brother, she's got her friends, and I'm looking forward to just hearing. I'm just being a bit nosy, really. I'm just here for the secrets and the stuff that you're finding out about individuals, rather than the big world stuff. So I'm really looking forward to those combos to come.
It is a slick podcast.
Have you seen there was a journal that went with her. She obviously had a book out, didn't she? Yeah. And the Netflix film. But there was a journal, and one of the things I did during lockdown was join with a group of other women who run small businesses, and we went through the journal. And I just love the way that in her podcast, in her books, her journals, she asks you the questions that really cut to the heart of what is it that matters to you? Like, I just flipped open the journal, one quote came here: if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's the power of using your own voice. Write about a time when you spoke your truth to others. How did it make you feel? What did you learn? And I think that this podcast series is going to be pressing the buttons on most of us to look at those questions.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I've just been writing a book about no one can change your life except for you. I'm like, Michelle, you put it so much better right there. Michelle Obama getting in there first. But it is incredible. The Michelle Obama podcast available on Spotify. So we have another podcast that we're going to talk about, and it's called, again, so different again. This is Brian and Roger. It's basically a couple of friends who are middle-aged divorcees leaving phone messages for each other. And it's written by Harry Peacock and Dan Skinner. So before we talk about it, this is a little clip where Brian is practicing slapping Roger for a competition he is entering in Siberia. Have a listen.
We'll repeat this exercise every few days and determine our progress. We're going to let you know the levels of discomfort using a scale from 1 to 10. 1 being a paper cut, 5 being a stubbed toe, and 10 being hit by a car at 30 miles an hour. Okay, ready?
What are you going to do?
What's that?
Oh, let me just...
Yep. I think the first one won't be that hard.
Okay, this is just to determine. Don't go mad at this stage.
No, obviously. Don't worry, I'll just do it. I promise.
Okay.
Right, okay, ready? How was that? Is that alright?
Oh, that slapping sound. It is a great piece of comedy. So much so that it won silver in this year's Best Comedy at the British Podcast Awards. Claire and Laura, you've both listened to Brian and Roger. Again, so different to what we've talked about. Claire.
It's just such a bizarre format, right? So it really is. The episodes I've listened to, it is just two guys leaving each other voicemails, and you know, it just sounds so obscure and so weird, but you kind of feel like you're hooked into their world, and you're like, did he just say that? I mean, I'm hooked. I hadn't heard this until you guys threw this out to me, until it got mentioned in the British Podcast Awards, and I have just downloaded, because there's 4 seasons, I've downloaded the first season as something to listen to on my holiday, you know, far away.
I also think it's perfect. We're actually going to speak to Dan now, who plays Roger, but we talk about different times that you listen to podcasts, and I do love the true crime, but I can't listen to them at night time, and this is one I listen to by myself and I just have a giggle. Dan, who plays Roger, welcome to the show.
Hi Laura, thanks for having me on.
Well, Dan Skinner, tell me first of all a little bit about this podcast for nobody for someone who's never listened to this podcast before. What is it about? What is its premise?
Okay, so briefly, it's about 2 divorced men. Mm-hmm. One of them is extremely reunited with his son and just live a normal sort of family life. And the other one is like a predatory sociopath who preys on the vulnerable one. And they've met at a support group for recently divorced men. And Brian has sort of eyed up Roger and got him in his sights and gets him to do all sorts of various things. And Roger invariably ends up getting shafted, for want of a better word, on Radio 5, but at the end of each episode. So that's basically the format, and you've used a clip there where you don't hear them sending messages to each other, but the whole story is told through voicemail messages. They just leave each other messages, and that's how the story unfolds. So that's basically it.
It's a very clever format. Where did the idea come from to do it? When did you decide to do it?
Well, we're sort of 2 busy people with families, and we had these characters, and we wanted to tell some sort of story in some format, but we weren't sure the best way of doing it. And the idea of actually getting in a room and writing on a computer seemed like a bit of a faff. So we just started leaving voicemail messages on each other's phone, and we went to a production company called Great Big Owl, who'd been great, and we said, look, we got all these messages and we want to turn them into a story, so if you just put them out, you know, in the order they're supposed to go out, and then add sound effects and a little bit of studio stuff, then I think that will be enough. And so that's how it works.
It's very, very funny, Dan. But there's also a serious message there as well, isn't there?
I guess there is.
Maybe it wasn't intentional, but I feel there is about vulnerability in men. You do kind of we talk about podcasts having space of conversations that aren't normally talked about.
I think that that's kind of vulnerability was sort of, we wanted to be, certainly Roger, we wanted him to be as vulnerable as possible, and we wanted Brian to be as sort of blinkered as possible, so it becomes sort of a pretty good sitcom mix, and also I think the idea of that hopefully the death of white male privilege is something we wanted to deal with as well. The idea that two middle-aged white men who a few years ago would have just been cruising through life with no problems at all, and just the pick of the jobs and what have you, and just found themselves on the scrap heap at a really bad time in their lives, and how they cope and deal with it. And I think just putting them all in the worst situations possible and seeing how they cope with it. Now that seems to be like where all the comedy comes from. That's what makes it funny, I think. I hope.
And Dan, do you see many more episodes to come in the future?
Oh yes, yeah. So we'll just keep going until it's not fun anymore. I mean, they go all over.
There's been some weird situations, yeah. And you can go anywhere in a podcast.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's like a cartoon, or you can just. It's radio or podcast. You can just literally, you can go everywhere, and it's part of the fun is just listening to it and trying to imagine where they are. So we've been to Norway, Siberia, all over Europe, all over the world. So it's the only limit is our imagination. So we just keep going until it's not fun anymore. So fifth series coming out.
Very much, and do check out the Brian and Roger podcast, which did very well at the British Podcast Awards. Lots of messages coming in on Twitter and text. You can text us on 85058. Ray from Liverpool says, my favourite podcast is Screaming Queens podcast. It's all about the horror movie genre. I don't know if that's one for me. I don't do horror films very well. However, Claire, your must listen next has an eerie type feeling. Let's just have a little listen before we speak about it.
I talked to Mom when they were in the air. They were 20 minutes out, and that was 3 hours ago.
Wait. Yeah, they're coming in on my phone too.
Kids, something's happening.
She said something's happening.
I love you both. The last thing my mom ever sent me was a text message. It said, something's wrong. Your dad is... My dad is... What exactly, Mom? What is he?
What is he? I want to know, Claire.
Oh, so that clip was from season 1, but season 2 of Blood Ties is now out. It's basically, what if your parents died in a plane crash, and then basically everything you knew about them wasn't quite true. So it's like following a brother and sister as they kind of uncover the truth about who their family really is. Go get the first season. There's 6 episodes in that one. Second season has just landed, so there's loads for you to binge on.
Lots of big names in this one as well, like the harrowing.
Yeah, so Dominic Monaghan is in season 2. You know, the fella from Lost and Lord of the Rings. Yeah. And it's also another one that's great to listen to on headphones because it moves all around you. The sound effects are brilliant. I just kind of binge listened the season 1, so I've got this one ready to go for my August binge box set listen.
Laura, is this the type of thing that is for you? Do you like mysteries?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, like I said when talking about the harrowing, I didn't think I was really into fiction, and so I just hadn't given it the chance. But I'm going to. The harrowing reminded me, and this one almost reminded me of and I know you don't like them, Laura, of horror films, and that because I had that same feeling of just like, oh no, I don't want to think about this till I go to sleep. I don't want to think about the severed head or whatever it was. But that sounds like it applies less to this one, thank goodness.
Less severed heads. Claire, the makers of this one have quite a history in this type of genre, don't they?
Yeah, so Wondery have made this. If you are new to podcasting and you're looking for a good quality place to start, then Google Wondery. They are the biggest podcast production company in North America, responsible for so many big players. And you'll find not just fiction, but a ton of true crime, all kinds of factual stuff as well. It's just a good place to start if you're new.
How long are each of the episodes?
These ones, actually, I don't know. Are they like about 40, 45 minutes?
I'm always, you know, some podcasts are really long. I just think I have a certain amount of time. Anything over an hour, and even at best times, depending on what it is, my brain, I don't know, do you listen to the long podcasts?
Well, see, it depends, right? Because you would never just pick up a book and read a book in one sitting. And I think sometimes people, like, there's a history podcast, isn't there? By Dan, what's his name? One episode is 6 hours. That's it. 6 hours, right? No one's going to listen in 6 hours, but they know that, and they say, come back and pick it up. So there's no people. The first thing people ask me is, how long should a podcast be? And my thing is, well, what's it about and who's listening? And that's where I think, as a listener, you kind of find what time have you got to listen, when are you going to listen as well, and you find something that suits you. Like you're saying, listen to something comedy before bed, but maybe something else, more discussion in the day. So it depends.
Yeah. Thank you to Laura Gallup and to Claire Freeman for indulging me and talking about podcasts, because I just think it's something that's going to get bigger and bigger the more we do. We will try and put up some of those recommendations. And as always, if you're like me and like the funny ones, just go a little bit mad every now and then and listen to something a little bit scarier. Like I might go. I got a recommendation there from one of our listeners for a horror, and I'm AJ, Seen on Radio. That's available. I'm going to give that a little go too, the 3 series of that. Sarah Pascoe will be my guest tomorrow. She's got a great podcast, Sex, Money, Power. We'll talk about her new book, but join me from 1 here and 5 Live. Drive us next with Tony and Claire.
On digital, BBC Sounds, smart speaker and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
BBC News at 4 o'clock. This is Nikki Cardwell. Lebanon has placed a number of Beirut port officials under house arrest while an investigation is carried out into last night's explosion in the city. The blast, which left at least 100 people dead, has been blamed on tons of ammonium nitrate stored unsafely in a warehouse at the port. Rescue workers are searching for 100 people who are believed to be missing. An expert in international relations, Fawaz Gerges, says the explosion has made Lebanon's problems even worse.
You have a huge segment of the population who are basically starving at this particular moment. You add to it COVID-19, that the world has forgotten about Lebanon, the moral bankruptcy of the governing elite in Lebanon, the regional rivalries that are playing on Lebanon streets. And what you have really is a catastrophe.
And the Queen says she was deeply saddened by the news of the blast. In a message to Lebanon's president, she added that the royal family's thoughts and prayers were with those who'd been affected. A man has been convicted of raping a Wesley Street killed Keely Bunker after they'd been on a night out in Birmingham to celebrate her birthday. Phil Mackey reports.
Keely Bunker was described by her family as a vibrant, caring and beautiful soul. Tamworth came to a standstill for the funeral of the popular 20-year-old last year. She was raped and murdered by her friend Wesley Street after they'd been for a night out in Birmingham. Street initially pretended not to know what had happened to him. Women came forward and told the police that he'd either raped or assaulted them. Staffordshire Police described him as devious and manipulating.
Pubs, cafes and restaurants in Aberdeen will be forced to close in the next hour following a tightening of lockdown restrictions in the city. The Scottish Government said there'd been a significant outbreak of COVID-19, which may have involved some community transmission. The Moray MP Douglas Ross has been confirmed as the new leader of the Scottish Conservatives. He replaces Jackson Carlaw, who resigned after just 6 months in the job. Our political editor in Scotland, Brian Taylor, says Mr Ross has a number of challenges to deal with.
He's an MP, not an MSP, so he'll have to stand for Holyrood in the elections next year, which he says he will do. In terms of early priorities, he's talking about developing a plan to boost Scotland's economy. Boy, is it going to need that after the COVID crisis, which of course is an economic crisis as well. But above all, perhaps in the longer term, Mr Ross is talking about strengthening the defence of the Union.
And visitors have returned to the Natural History Museum in central London for the first time since March because of the coronavirus lockdown. The attraction, which is free to get into, is now operating a ticketing system to allow for a reduced capacity. Ahead of its reopening, curators revealed that they got rid of quite a lot of dust to ensure that people could enjoy the exhibits again. BBC News, it's 4
This is BBC Radio 5 Live on digital, BBC Sounds, smart speaker and online.
We'll take a look at your travel news. And the M66 in Manchester heading south, down from Junction 3 at Hollins to Junction 4, where it joins the M60 at Simister Island. There's a breakdown in one of the lanes. The M62 in West Yorkshire, there's an accident, which means 2 lanes closed now westbound, just outside Leeds. Junction 27 at Gildersham to Junction 26 at Chainbar. The queue stretch back to Junction 28 at Tingley. The A1M Doncaster bypass and a breakdown is at Junction 36 for Doncaster on the northbound side. At the exit, Slip Road has a lane closed. The M40, and it's just reopened in Warwickshire on the northbound side. Junction 13 at Bishop's Touchbrook, it's after an accident. The M4 and a breakdown on the exit Slip Road westbound in Berkshire at Junction 11 for Reading. At the M25, anti-clockwise queues at Junction 28, that's at the A12 and for Brentwood. It was a breakdown partly blocking the exit Slip Road. The M3 and southbound queues from the M25 down towards Junction 3 at Lightwater. So Junction 2 to Junction 3, there's a lane closed southbound. There was also a lane closed on the London-bound northbound side, and that was for a broken down lorry, but they've reopened those lanes now 3 to 2. Orna Merchant, 5 Live Travel.
Orna, thank you very much indeed. Let's head to Old Trafford for an update on the cricket. A slightly damp, I'm assuming. Eleanor Oldroyd is there.
Yeah, I'm afraid so, Tony. The covers are on, and they have been for about an hour. Rain stopped play with Pakistan. 121 for 2. We were really enjoying watching Babar Azam, one of the finest batsmen in the world, playing here. He's on 52, Shan Masood on 45. It feels like a long time since England took their wickets before lunch, but I don't know what the prospects are, but they're not looking very bright at the moment. 121 for 2, Pakistan.
Ellie, thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, Tony and Claire McDonald with you today. Hello, Claire.
Hello. How are you doing?
All right, thank you. Yeah, we've tons to get in today. That horrific explosion in Beirut, we're going to examine the aftermath of that, particularly this notion that there were 2,750 tonnes of explosive ammonium nitrate stored in the port. The question now from the authorities is who knew it was there, and there have been some arrests as well amongst port officials. So we'll look at that as the programme goes along.
We're going to be taking a trip up to Aberdeen as well, because in a little under an hour's time, certain lockdown restrictions are back in Aberdeen. This is because 54 new cases of coronavirus has been traced to a whether this is the way certain hotspots around the country may go if we want to get schools back in September. So we're bringing you that story too.
And have you ever, Claire, I don't know that much about your private life. I might have to pry during the next few days, but have you ever made a grand gesture? For love or other reasons?
Gesture? Well, I've made a bit of a fool of myself in love, yeah. I'm happy to spill it.
Go on, in what way?
Oh, just embarrassing yourself in front of people really fancy, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But you're talking about this disastrous proposal, aren't you?
A guy lit, as soon as you hear the first sentence, you know it's going to go badly wrong. He lit hundreds of tea lights to set the scene for his proposal to his girlfriend in Sheffield in his flat, and then when he went together, he came back and he burnt the flat down. So we thought today...
Quite a catch, isn't he? Yeah.
They're all right. So we thought today, when have you... Particular romantic gesture, when has a grand gesture gone wrong? We'd love to hear your stories on that. Hopefully not involving the emergency services, perhaps, but
Let's see. 85058 at BBC 5 Live if you want to text us those stories throughout the afternoon. So Claire and Tony with you for the next 3 hours.
BBC 5 Live.
Laura Whitmore.
Hey, I'm Laura Whitmore, back on BBC Radio 5 Live every Sunday. Join me and my guests as we kick back and chew over everything that's grabbed our attention this week.
An Afghan all-female robotics team have designed a low-cost ventilator. It's long-lasting, lightweight, and it will help to tackle the coronavirus pandemic. And it's going to save lives for years to come. And I just thought, what a wonderful story of a team of youngsters.
And 18 as well. I kind of look back to what I was doing at 18.
I was not doing that.
Laura Whitmore, Sunday morning from 10.
BBC Radio 5 Live. 5 Live is digital.
On digital, BBC Sounds, smart speaker and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
Yes, let's get straight to our main story then this afternoon. Rescue workers are looking for more than 100 people who are still missing after that huge explosion that devastated the port area of Beirut yesterday. It killed at least 100 other people. In fact, AFP, the news agency, have just said that the official toll is now 113, but there are many, many more missing. More than 4,000 were injured. One of our journalists for the BBC Arabic service, Mariam Toumi, was sitting in her office in the city filming a video interview when it happened.
في البداية ممكن تعطينا لمحة عن
Shocking to hear as much as to see it, really. The video goes on to show Mariam getting onto her feet after that explosion. Many of the city's port officials have now been placed under house arrest whilst an investigation takes place. The whole city was shaken and a mushroom cloud could be seen spreading over the port area. Local authorities say it's likely the blast was caused by a fire igniting tons of ammonium nitrate, which was being stored unsafely in a warehouse.
Well, the Queen has sent a message of condolence to the Lebanese president, saying she and the Duke of Edinburgh had been deeply saddened by the devastation caused by the explosion. And the Lebanese community in the UK has been reacting to the news. These people were on the Edgware Road in London earlier today.
All these people that have lost their lives, it's such a tragedy. We found out on WhatsApp and we were very worried. We were making calls down to Lebanon. We were getting calls from Lebanon. We were getting calls from all around the world. I mean, everyone was feeling our pain.
You can't sleep thinking about people who's dying on the streets, who are injured, who lost families, who are missing. It's like tragic.
And I heard that people down in Lebanon are also giving their houses, for people that don't have houses. So people are opening their houses to people whose houses have been bombed or destroyed. It's the last thing Lebanese people needed. They've had the coronavirus, they've had protests, and now this, it's the last thing. People don't even have money to eat. Some families are really suffering. Some people don't even have bread. We try and do our bit. I mean, every Lebanese in London and around the world, I'm sure, is trying to do their bit. The currency is so low that no matter how much you send, they'll only get maybe not even half of what you send down because the currency is just so, it's dropped a lot.
Well, the Red Cross is working with the Lebanese Health Ministry to set up new mortuaries in Beirut as hospitals in the city have been overwhelmed, as I'm sure you can imagine. The UK government's expected to announce a package of support soon. We mentioned those arrests. The cabinet in Lebanon have instructed the military there, we're just finding out now, this in from Reuters, to impose house arrest on anyone involved since 2014 in the administration of the warehouse that contained that ammonium nitrate. It appears it was taken from a Russian ship in 2013 and it's been stored there for quite some time. Lizzie Porter joins us now, who's a journalist in Beirut. Hi, Lizzie.
Hello there.
Anyone who's seen these videos and indeed heard them, they're truly terrifying, that moment of the explosion. Can you tell me your experience of that moment?
Absolutely, yeah. It was terrifying. It was about 6:10 in the evening here in Beirut and still light. I was sitting in my living room doing some work on my laptop and there was enormous thunder-like sound, or a rumble. We get a lot of noises here in Beirut. We get Israeli drones flying over, we get helicopters, motorbikes backfiring. So we get a lot of sounds, but this was something else. The whole building shook underneath me as if an earthquake was happening. And then there was an enormous bang. I was blasted backwards along with our front door, which is no longer intact. My glasses fell off my face and blown backwards onto the floor. That was really my experience. And we staggered outside and found our neighbours. People were running out of their front doors, had head injuries. We've got a lot of elderly neighbours, so we checked on them. Luckily, most people in our area had light injuries, but not too much worse. But however, down towards the port area, the scenes of destruction just get worse and worse the closer you get to the port. I was down there earlier, and it looks apocalyptic.
Yeah, 300,000 people homeless, which puts the scale of this into context. Lizzie, what were you imagining had happened in that time before you knew what perhaps had been involved here?
As someone who watches a lot of footage of war jets and conflict, my immediate thought was that it was a fighter jet. It's a very low, that very sound of a fighter jet flying very, very low. And people in Lebanon are very aware that Israel strikes rockets and weapons depots of the Iran-backed Lebanese group Hezbollah in Syria. So, and there was a big war between Israel and that group Hezbollah in 2006 here, in which there were huge missile strikes on various targets in Beirut. So it's not a huge leap for people here to think this is an airstrike. And that's what people thought. Everyone I've spoken to, or nearly everyone, thought that was what it was at first. Right. However, that seems to have been ruled out.
No, it does, and it's now, it looks like it was this huge stash of ammonium nitrate that ignited. What as that becomes apparent in Beirut and around Beirut, is there anger from people? Because we hear that port officials have been arrested. What are people saying about the fact it's been stored there for nigh on 7 years?
People are extremely angry. People are traumatised, shocked, angry, frustrated, and for people here this is just yet another sign of the incompetence and corruption of the authorities that run the country here. People have already seen the country collapse financially and economically there, and have blamed that widely on the government's inability to manage the country economically over years. People say here for 30 years our government and our authorities have done very, very little for us, have done nothing for us. And so for people here it's yet another sign and a fatal sign now that of the incompetence and corruption of the people who lead them.
In a second, we're going to speak to a paediatrician about the struggles within the health community, and that there are simply not enough beds. I mean, that's become clear. Lizzie, just before we move to that, can you, and I think it's important for people listening to this that we get some wider context, can you, because there have been huge protests, as you say, in Lebanon over recent years about corruption. Can you just explain to us this idea, this notion that the three main roles within the government, the President, the Speaker, the Prime Minister, are split to different parties, and therefore that is what leads people to believe the government is particularly open to corruption. Just can you talk us through that a little bit, give us some context?
So this goes back to a sort of gentleman's agreement around the time Lebanon gained independence from France in the 1940s, that in order to maintain the sectarian balance in Lebanon, which has been the cause of lots of violence, not just throughout the 20th century, but prior to that as well, that having a Maronite Christian president, a Sunni Muslim prime minister, and a Shia Muslim speaker of the parliament, that would divide power in such a way that the sectarian balance would be maintained. The problem of that is that people from that leads to lots of state employment, so many people employed in the public sector, but many people would argue far too many people argued because of their sect rather than because of their competencies, and leading to a lot of people remaining in their roles because of corruption and who they know, nepotism, rather than on a meritocratic basis.
Yes, leading to accusations of promoting self-interest. Lizzie, look, that's really interesting. Thank you for that. Lizzie Porter, there, journalist in Beirut. I think it is important that we get a notion of how the country operates, so we can look at the way that they might be able to solve all the problems that they now face. Dr. Ziad Shabel is a paediatrician in Beirut and joins us now. Ziad, hello.
Hello.
Hi. We were talking earlier about the health infrastructure essentially being swamped by this disaster and the fact that hospitals are overwhelmed. What have you seen in the last 24 hours?
Well, I want to first start by offering my condolences to all the Lebanese people who lost dear ones, and I was one of them. We lost 4 nurses in a hospital I used to work in Ashrafiyeh. 4 nurses who were very young and very talented and very heartful. They lost their lives when they were doing their jobs, saving lives. So this is very, very sad for us. We also have lots of doctors in the hospitals that were near the explosion who got injured. Some of them had severe injuries. The 2 hospitals that I used to work in, one of them was located exactly right next to the port, the Karantina Hospital. We used to run a pediatric department there for refugees and for unfortunate people in Lebanon. The whole department was collapsed. It was a miracle that none of the babies were harmed, but it was a real disaster. As for the hospital in St. George Hospital, the University Medical Center in Ashrafiyeh, it's one of the biggest hospitals in Lebanon, and the scenes from there are horrible. You cannot imagine. Everything was destroyed. Everything. The glasses, the incubators for the babies. You cannot imagine. It's a war scene inside the hospital. So it's kind of devastating. We are feeling a mixed combination of sadness and anger at the same time, because at some point we saw this coming, but not in the intensity that we have seen.
Yes, the government have declared 3 days of national mourning, but the wider question, we've talked about the crisis within the health sector. The hospitals can't cope. There's the economic crisis. COVID's on the rise there. There has been civil strife, accusations of corruption. I guess the question I want to ask Ziad is, many people are volunteering, they're going to blood banks, but how will Beirut and Lebanon respond to this wider than just the general public? Will there be political unrest on the back of this, do you think now? How can the country's infrastructure even begin to fight back?
I think it is very hard. The thing is that just before the explosion, the government announced that the country will go into a total lockdown on the 6th of August because the coronavirus cases were on the rise, and hospitals in Lebanon were already devastated by the number of cases, and they were out of their they couldn't accept all the patients because. And then this massive explosion happened. Thousands of people rushed into the hospitals. Several hospitals that were near the scene, which are one of the biggest hospitals in Lebanon, they were severely damaged. And Beirut yesterday, the health system in Beirut yesterday was a total mess. One of my cousins who was injured during the attack, he was injured and he needed sutures. He couldn't even get to a hospital to get the sutures. Like, one of the nurses had to come to his house, one of the nurses that he knows, to suture him inside his house. So this is this per se is something horrible. That many people were on the streets getting the care by doctors. We couldn't even have people inside the premises of the hospital. So now with the rise of the coronavirus cases, and with this massive explosion with the hundreds of and thousands of people who were injured, I think we're going to have a real crisis in Beirut and in Lebanon. in general.
Ziad, listen, good luck and thank you very much for spending some time with us today. Thank you, Dr. Ziad Shibel, who's a paediatrician in Beirut. We'll speak to more people within the medical profession there. The government in Lebanon have just announced that they're going to give $50 million towards fighting the aftermath of the crisis, and France particularly are trying to push for an international response as well, a joint international response. So any more on that we'll bring you as it happens. It is now 21 minutes past 4.
It's 5 Live Drive. Tony Livesey and Claire MacDonald with you today. Let's tell you about what's going on in Aberdeen now. Some local lockdown restrictions will be brought back into force there from 5 o'clock this evening after 54 new cases of coronavirus were recorded. Pubs, cafes and restaurants there will have to close, and people won't be able to visit each other's homes unless they are part of an extended household group. Let's talk to Alison Scott, a partner in Howie's Restaurants, which has a place in Aberdeen as well as 3 in Edinburgh. Hi, Alison.
Hi.
This is not the news you wanted. Tell us how you heard.
Well, actually, I heard when your researcher phoned me up and said, "What do you think about this?" So I just about collapsed. Shocked, absolutely shocked. There has been obviously a rise of cases and suspected cases in the area, and we've been keeping a close eye on it, but you never really think that they're going to just take that decision as quickly as they have. So 5 o'clock tonight, everyone shuts their doors.
And your restaurant in Aberdeen, you hadn't yet opened that, had you?
No, we haven't. We decided we've got, as you say, 3 sites in Edinburgh, 1 in Aberdeen. We have 2 of our sites have got outdoor seating, which seemed like the natural starting point. So we decided on a staged reopening, and as a result of that, our site in Aberdeen hasn't opened its doors since we were closed at the beginning of lockdown at the end of March.
How's business been since you were able to reopen in Edinburgh?
Well, obviously we were later than England opening up here. We opened up on the 29th of July, which was literally 1 week ago, and the weather's been on our side. That's helped immensely, I have to say. And slowly we've been building up. We've taken so many precautions in terms of making ourselves as COVID safe as we possibly can. We've got rubber stamps from the AA, from Visit Scotland, and people are coming back. But this is the sort of thing I think that will shake their confidence, and that obviously is a worry right across the UK, not just in Scotland. So we are doing our very best. We're busy, and we've obviously got Rishi Sunak's Monday to Wednesday offer on this week, and we have been booked out. But again, we are waiting to see exactly how the ongoing effect of this is. The lockdown in Aberdeen, I believe, is a 5-mile radius, but they've already stated that there's a suspected case in Aboyne, which is already way out of that mile from Aberdeen. It's about 25 miles from Aberdeen. So we wonder if this is just, the domino that is going to start the whole thing again.
I mean, it sounds like you've been very sensible there, and people have felt safe, and that's why they returned to your establishments in Edinburgh. They tracked this cluster initially to the Hawthorne Bar in Aberdeen. You're in this industry. Do you think certain establishments are being a bit fast and loose with what they should be doing?
I don't know. We hear from various people that there are various establishments that aren't putting as many things in place as they should. Again, it's that feeling that was in March, that was in June, this is now August, and it's all over. The sun comes out and people go a little bit mad. I don't know any specific, I wouldn't name and shame anybody, but I do think there is a lack of responsibility in some cases. People aren't taking it as seriously as others. Majority of operators, it's their livelihood, it's our bread and butter. We're responsible for, we've already had to make redundancies in our company, which was heartbreaking for obviously everybody concerned, because we don't know when we will be able to open up these other sites. So for anybody not to take that responsibility as seriously as they should, it just takes one. That's the thing, and
that is it.
The whole industry.
It's that simple, isn't it? Do you think some places are not using face coverings when maybe they should because it deters people from coming in?
Absolutely, yes. I believe there are various bars and whatnot that that have been told, the customers don't want to see you with a face mask on. They want to see a smiling, welcoming personality. So there definitely is an element of that happening. But the other side of that is there are people taking a great deal of care, putting all these things into place as we do. We're taking people's temperatures. We've spent thousands putting up screens and making it, as I say, as safe as possible. But you can't legislate for a huge group of people standing outside, be it a bar, a restaurant, a park, or just gathering in the sunshine for a chat. And I think the younger ones definitely have to be reminded on a regular basis how important this is, because they seem to have reverted back to their normal behaviour, which I understand. If I was 22, I wouldn't be reading the newspapers, listening to the radio constantly. I'd be getting on with my life. And because Boris isn't standing up every day and giving us the genuine stats and what's happening, he's decided to go on elsewhere, obviously to deflect from what really is happening, because it doesn't reflect very well on him. Then I think there is an element of people that are just thinking, that was then and this is now, everything's fine. And it's not.
Alison, it's good to talk to you. Alison Scott, their partner, with Howie's Restaurants. They've got a place in Aberdeen which hasn't opened since lockdown, but as well, they do have 3 in Edinburgh. And as you heard, there are concerns now that this may be the start of more of the same, more local lockdowns. Thanks for the time, Alison. 16:27 now.
If you're wondering why we've not heard from Ellie Oldroyd since the start of the programme, she's probably huddled under an umbrella at Old Trafford. The cricket is rained off at the moment. Pakistan 121 for 2 on the first day of the test against England. If they get back on, we'll get back to Ellie. Thank you for all your texts about grand gestures gone wrong. There's a bloke in Sheffield burnt his flat down with tea lights as he waited to propose to his partner. We'll go through some of those very shortly. But while we're on the subject of sport, European football's back tonight. The tension will be unbearable. Can Manchester United keep their 5-0 aggregate lead over Lask in the Europa League? I dare say they can. So while they take care of matters on the pitch, what about matters off it? What about some transfers at the moment? The window's open. Who's buying who's doing what? We'll start with Manchester United. Simon Stone's here, our football reporter. Hello, Simon.
Hello. You built that up really well, Tony.
Well, they'll go through, won't they, tonight? 5-0. He'll play the kids, won't he?
I don't think he'll play the kids. I think they've not played for kind of a week and a half, and they've obviously got the remainder of the competition, we assume, to go. So I don't think it's going to be entirely a team of kids. It'll be interesting to see. I think it might be a mixture. But as I'm spending 2 hours there this evening, I want to make it feel as though it's worthwhile.
I'm trying to build the tension.
Hope.
Well, let's see what happens. Right, so I've got a load of quick-fire questions, Simon, for you on the transfer front, right? Jadon Sancho, first of all, to Manchester United. Is that going through? Is there any obstacles in the way? Where are we on that?
Right, well, Dortmund say they want a decision by the 10th of August. Man United say unless Dortmund reduce their prices, their asking price, which is around £100 million, they'll walk away, because that doesn't take effect of the pandemic and the financial implications of that. Dortmund have employed one of the their trusted agents, Marco Lichtsteiner, to help facilitate the deal. So I think where we are at the moment is Dortmund want to push the price up, Manchester United want to bring it down, and we're going to end up somewhere in the middle. We've got to bear in mind that the transfer deadline is not until the 5th of October, and the start of the season is the 12th of September, and the start of the German season is the 19th or 18th of September. So although Dortmund have come up with this arbitrary deadline, there's still a lot of time to play with here.
Manchester City have got some business done. They've signed Nathan Ake from Bournemouth. That's confirmed. Is that? I see. Is he for a medical today or something?
That will be announced either later tonight or tomorrow morning, I'm led to believe. Ferran Torres, 20-year-old from Valencia, he's already been signed for £20 million, and clearly he's not without confidence, because he's given an interview to the Marca newspaper in Spain and said one of the conditions he'd laid down for staying at Valencia was that he wanted to be made captain, and he wanted a meeting with the owner, Peter Lim, and he got neither of those, but he asked for them anyway. So he's coming over to Man City as a confident replacement on the left side of their attack for Leroy Sané, who's gone to Bayern Munich.
Right, and the vultures are circling as well. Often when teams get relegated or they fail to get up through the playoffs, their best players are picked off. Liverpool are looking at the Norwich defender Jamal Lewis, and also clubs in the Premier League will be alerted because Ollie Watkins, who's a good player for Brentford, a good striker, he could be on his way because he's got a release clause. Is that right?
Yes, Watkins got an £18 million release clause, and Crystal Palace were among the first names to be mentioned with him. But there's also interest from Aston Villa, and that's interesting because the Aston Villa manager Dean Smith worked with Ollie Watkins at Brentford. So there is a link there. Jamal Lewis, Northern Ireland, 22-year-old Norwich defender, seen as a potential backup for Andy Robertson, who is clearly the first choice left back at Liverpool.
Good. As you get prepared then for Old Trafford, is it at Old Trafford tonight, the game, do you say?
It is indeed.
Yeah, so you're going,
Trafford. It's going to be a thrilling game, and no fans there, and the 5-0 up. So,
and it's raining, so marvellous. Have you any more nuggets?
No food either. You can't even get anything to eat.
No, corned beef sandwich will do you fine. Have you any more nuggets to display before you go?
Not at the moment. No. The interesting thing, I should have mentioned this. The other, a more kind of enticing game in the Europa League this evening is Inter Milan against Getafe. Inter Milan have Alexis Sanchez in their squad. Inter Milan are currently trying with Manchester United to find